There's someone who used to be in your life, someone you haven't spoken to in months, maybe years, and right now, in this very moment, they're thinking about you. Not casually, not in passing, but deeply. The kind of thinking that happens when the world goes quiet and there's nothing left to distract the mind from what it's been avoiding all day. They're lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and your face keeps appearing behind their closed eyes. Your voice keeps echoing in the hollow spaces of their memory, and you have no idea this is happening. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Someone out there, someone you've tried to forget, someone you've convinced yourself has forgotten you, is being visited by your presence in their most private hours. The connection you thought was severed still pulses beneath the surface of both your lives. The cord you believed you cut is still attached, invisible but undeniable, stretching across whatever distance now separates you. This isn't wishful thinking. This isn't some romantic notion designed to make you feel better about the people you've lost. This is something far more unsettling, far more profound, and far more true than most people are willing to accept. Carl Jung understood this. He spent his entire life exploring the invisible threads that connect human beings to one another, the ways we live on in each other's psyches, long after we've physically parted ways. He discovered that separation is an illusion the conscious mind desperately wants to believe, because the alternative is too overwhelming to accept. The alternative is that you're never truly alone. The alternative is that every significant relationship you've ever had has left permanent fingerprints on your soul. The alternative is that the person you stopped talking to, the one you've been trying so hard not to think about, is carrying a piece of you inside them that refuses to be silenced, especially in the dark, especially at night, especially when there's nowhere left to hide. I've spent years studying why this happens, what psychological mechanisms create these lasting bonds, and more importantly, what it means for your own healing and growth. Because here's what I've come to understand. The fact that someone still thinks about you isn't just about them. It's about you. It's about the energy you put into the world, the impact you had on another human being's development. And yes, the unfinished business that still lives in the space between you. Jung would say that until you understand what this connection truly represents, you'll keep recreating the same patterns with different faces, searching for resolution in relationships that can never give you what you're actually looking for. Something broke between you and this person. Maybe it shattered all at once in a moment of betrayal or anger. Maybe it eroded slowly, like a coastline surrendering to the sea, until one day you looked up and realized the landscape was unrecognizable. Either way, there's a wound there, not just in them, but in you. And that wound has a voice. That wound has needs. That wound has been waiting patiently for you to stop running and finally turn around to face it. You felt this before, haven't you? That sudden, inexplicable moment when someone you haven't thought about in ages suddenly floods your consciousness. You're doing something completely unrelated, washing dishes or driving to work, or standing in line at a grocery store, and out of nowhere they arrive. Not just as a memory, but as a presence, as if they've somehow stepped into the room of your mind uninvited. You wonder where that came from. You wonder why now. You tell yourself it means nothing and try to move on with your day. But the feeling lingers. The residue stays. Jung called this phenomenon participation mystique, a term borrowed from the anthropologist Lucien Levy-Bruhl. It describes the way human beings remain psychologically merged with the people who have mattered to us, even when physical contact has ended, even when years have passed, even when we've done everything in our power to separate ourselves completely. We don't just have relationships with other people. We absorb them. We internalize parts of them. They become woven into the fabric of our psyche in ways we rarely recognize and almost never fully understand. And the most profound connections, the ones that shaped us the most, continue to exert their influence long after the relationship has apparently ended. The person who still thinks about you at night isn't simply remembering. They're engaging with an internal version of you that has taken up permanent residence in their unconscious. You exist inside them now as an image, as an archetype, as an unresolved complex that activates whenever certain feelings arise that they haven't yet learned to process. And here's what might startle you. You're doing the exact same thing with them, whether you admit it or not, whether you're aware of it or not. They live inside you too, visiting you in dreams, coloring your perceptions of new people you meet, influencing decisions you make without realizing where the influence is coming from. I once spoke with a woman who had ended a friendship nearly a decade earlier. A deep, profound friendship that had meant everything to her during a particularly difficult chapter of her life. They had drifted apart over something that seemed small at the time, a misunderstanding that neither of them had the emotional vocabulary to address directly. Years passed. She moved to a different city, built a different life, made different friends. She rarely thought about this person anymore, or so she told herself. Then one evening, she was sitting alone in her apartment, and something shifted. She described it as a wave, a sudden, overwhelming flood of this person's presence washing over her. She could almost smell the perfume her friend used to wear. She could hear her laugh as clearly as if she were sitting across the table. And with that wave came tears she hadn't known were stored inside her, grief she had never properly processed, love she had never fully acknowledged. She asked me almost desperately what it meant. Was her friend thinking about her in that moment? Had something happened to her? Was this some kind of psychic connection? I told her what I'll tell you now. It didn't matter whether her friend was literally thinking about her in that exact instant. What mattered was that a part of her own psyche, a part that had been carrying this friend all along, had finally grown strong enough to break through the wall of denial she had constructed. The visitation wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from within. It was her own soul, demanding that she acknowledge what she had lost, what she had never mourned, what still needed to be felt and released. But here's the thing that might unsettle you. Jung would also say that the psyche doesn't operate in neat, individual containers. The collective unconscious connects all of us in ways the rational mind struggles to accept. So while that woman was having her moment of overwhelming connection, it's entirely possible, perhaps even probable, that her friend was having her own experience of stirring, her own moment of being haunted by something she couldn't name. The cord between them was vibrating. Both of them could feel it, even if only one of them was consciously aware. You've been carrying someone like this. You know exactly who I'm talking about. The person whose name just appeared in your mind as you're listening to these words. The one you've trained yourself not to reach out to. The one you've deleted numbers for, unfollowed accounts for, rearranged your life to avoid running into. You've done all the external work of separation. But internally, they're still there. They're still visiting you. And you visiting them. The question isn't whether this connection is real. It is. The question is what you're going to do with this knowledge. This isn't simply about nostalgia. It isn't about missing someone the way you might miss a favorite restaurant from a city you used to live in. This is about unfinished psychological work. This is about parts of yourself that you outsourced to another person. Parts that still haven't returned home. Parts that are trapped in the dynamic you shared with them. Jung wrote extensively about how we project unconscious contents onto the people in our lives. The parts of ourselves we can't see, the parts we've disowned or never developed, we unconsciously place onto others. We fall in love with our projections. We build friendships around them. We construct entire relationships on the foundation of what we need to see in another person, rather than who they actually are. When those relationships end, something crucial remains unresolved. The projection doesn't simply dissolve because the person is no longer physically present. The psychic energy that was bound up in that projection has to go somewhere. It often sinks back into the unconscious, where it continues to exert influence in hidden ways. It shows up in dreams. It colors your perception of new relationships. It creates a strange, persistent sense that something is missing, even when your conscious life appears complete. Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." Read that again. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Not one of you. Both. The transformation is mutual and permanent. You are not the person you were before you knew them. They are not the person they were before they knew you. You have chemically altered each other's psychological composition. And that alteration doesn't reverse simply because you stop speaking. What he's really saying is that significant relationships leave lasting changes in the structure of the psyche itself. You don't just remember these people. You become different people because of them. And the parts that changed, the parts that grew or wounded or awakened in their presence, those parts remain active even in their absence. This is why the person you stopped talking to still thinks about you every night. Not because they're weak, or not because they're stuck in the past, but because you became part of their psychological architecture. You helped build rooms in their inner house that didn't exist before you arrived. And when you left, you didn't take those rooms with you. You left them furnished with your presence, your voice, your way of being. They walk through those rooms every day without realizing it. And at night, when the distractions fade and the noise quiets down, they find themselves wandering back to the spaces you helped create, remembering what it felt like when you were still there. The same is happening inside you. There are rooms in your psyche built by and for this person. Rooms you've tried to board up, seal off, pretend don't exist. But psychological architecture doesn't work that way. What you repress doesn't disappear. It pressurizes. It finds other outlets. It sneaks through cracks in dreams and unexpected emotional reactions, and moments of inexplicable longing that seem to come from nowhere. I struggled with this for years before I understood it. There was someone I had cut out of my life with what I thought was surgical precision. Clean break, no contact, no looking back. I was proud of how well I had handled it, how strong I had been, how completely I had moved on. Except I hadn't moved on at all. I had simply gone underground with it. I was carrying it everywhere while refusing to acknowledge its weight. And it took years, and a significant amount of painful self-examination before I realized that the person I was trying so hard to forget was still one of the most active presences in my unconscious life. They appeared in my dreams constantly, sometimes as themselves, sometimes wearing different faces but carrying the same emotional charge. Situations in my waking life that bore any resemblance to our dynamic would trigger disproportionate reactions in me. New people who reminded me of them, even tangentially, would either attract or repel me with suspicious intensity. I was still in a relationship with this person. The relationship had just moved from the visible world to the invisible one, and in some ways that made it more powerful, not less. This is the shadow work most people never get around to doing. They think ending a relationship means ending its influence. They think silence equals resolution. They think the absence of contact equals the presence of peace. But the psyche doesn't keep time the way the calendar does. Inside you, that person is still alive. That relationship is still happening. The questions it raised are still unanswered. The wounds it opened are still unhealed. And until you're willing to consciously engage with what remains, You'll keep finding yourself haunted by what you thought you left behind. Jung understood that we don't just have relationships with external people. We have relationships with the internal images of those people, what he called imagos. These imagos are shaped by our projections, our expectations, our needs, and our histories with similar figures from our past. When you fell out of relationship with this person, the external relationship ended. But the imago lived on, taking up residence in your unconscious, continuing to evolve, continuing to affect you in ways you can't see from the surface. And here's where it gets even more interesting. The imago isn't just a static memory. It's a living psychological reality that continues to develop independent of the actual person. Your internal version of them might be angrier than they actually are, or more loving, or more powerful, or more threatening. Your imago of them carries all the unprocessed material from the relationship, all the things that were never said, all the wounds that were never tended, all the love that was never fully expressed. This imago is what haunts you, and a corresponding imago of you is what haunts them. When I tell you that someone you stopped talking to still thinks about you every night, I'm not just making a poetic statement, I'm describing a psychological reality. The imago of you that lives inside them is active, especially during the quiet hours, especially when the defenses are down, especially when the unconscious has more access to the throne of consciousness. They're not just remembering you. They're in relationship with an internal version of you that may have grown, changed, and intensified since you last actually spoke. There's something I need you to understand about why certain relationships continue to haunt us while others fade naturally. It has to do with the degree to which the relationship engaged what Jung called the self, the totality of the psyche, both conscious and unconscious. Some relationships live primarily on the surface. They engage the persona, the social mask we wear, without ever reaching the deeper layers. When these relationships end, they leave relatively light traces. You might feel sadness, you might have fond memories, but you're not fundamentally altered by their absence. Other relationships pierce through to something more essential. They touch the shadow, the parts of ourselves we hide and deny. They engage the anima or animus, the contrasexual elements of our psyche that we project onto intimate partners. They activate archetypal energies, connecting us not just to another individual, but to timeless patterns of human connection that have been playing out since consciousness began. When these relationships end, they leave marks that go all the way to the bone. The person who still thinks about you every night is someone for whom your relationship engaged these deeper layers. You weren't just a pleasant companion in their life. You became a carrier of something numinous, something sacred, something that connected them to aspects of themselves they couldn't have accessed any other way. Losing you meant losing access to parts of their own psyche that you helped illuminate. And there's a mourning that happens at that level which ordinary grief doesn't touch. Jung spoke about this in terms of the archetypal dimensions of relationship. When we fall into deep connection with another person, we're not just connecting to their individual ego. We're connecting to the eternal patterns they embody for us. The lover becomes the beloved, the friend becomes the soul companion, the mentor becomes the wise one. These archetypal figures have a power that far exceeds the actual human being who carries them. And when the human being leaves, the archetypal figure remains, wandering through our psyche like a god who has lost their temple. This is why the longing can feel so out of proportion to what the relationship actually was. You find yourself missing someone with an intensity that your rational mind cannot justify. The relationship had problems. Maybe they hurt you. Maybe you hurt them. Maybe it was never quite what you wanted it to be. And yet the missing persists, grows stronger at night, refuses to obey your logical commands to let go and move on. That's because it's not just the person you're missing. It's the archetypal dimension they opened up inside you. It's the sacred space that existed between you. The space where something larger than both of you could be felt. A man I knew years ago told me something I've never forgotten. He had been through a bitter divorce, the kind where lawyers got involved and accusations flew, and the ending was as ugly as an ending could be. He thought he hated his ex-wife. He spent years cultivating that hatred, using it as fuel, using it as protection against the pain underneath. But then one night he had a dream. She came to him in the dream, not as the adversary he had made her into, but as something he could only describe as an angel. She was luminous. She was gentle. She looked at him with eyes full of a love he had forgotten was ever there. And she said just one thing. "I'm still waiting for you to see me clearly." He woke up sobbing. Not from grief exactly, but from the sudden brutal recognition that somewhere along the way he had lost the ability to perceive her as a full human being. He had reduced her to an enemy, a villain in the story he told himself about his own life. And in doing so, he had trapped both of them in a hell of his own making. The internal version of her he carried had become twisted, distorted, darkened, and that distorted imago was haunting him far more severely than her actual presence ever had. This is what Jung meant when he said we must reckon with the internal figure. The person who still thinks about you every night isn't just thinking about you as you actually are. They're thinking about the version of you that lives inside them, a version shaped by their own projections, needs, fears, and wounds. And you're doing the same with them. You're both in relationship with ghosts of each other, ghosts that may barely resemble the actual human beings who go on living their separate lives. The work, the real work, isn't about those external people. It's about those internal figures. It's about reclaiming the projections. It's about seeing what you placed onto them that actually belongs to you. It's about dissolving the distortions and releasing the archetypal energy that got bound up in a relationship that could never fully contain it. Maybe for you, it looks like this. There's someone you haven't spoken to in years, and the thought of reaching out fills you with a complicated mix of longing and dread. Part of you wants to reconnect. Part of you is terrified of what that would mean, what it would stir up, what you would have to face. You've constructed an entire identity around having moved on, and actually reaching out would threaten that identity. So you stay silent. You stay separate. And you tell yourself it's for the best. But at night, when the defenses drop and the unconscious rises, something in you reaches toward them across the void. Something in you whispers their name. Something in you replays conversations that happened and conversations that never did, trying to find the resolution that reality denied you. Perhaps you've noticed that every time you start getting close to someone new, the shadow of this old relationship looms up. You compare without meaning to. You guard places that don't need guarding. You sabotage without understanding why. The unfinished business with this person from your past is actively shaping your present, writing constraints into relationships that deserve to be written fresh. There's a version of this that shows up in your work life too, isn't there? If the person you stopped talking to was a mentor, a colleague, a partner in some shared purpose, you might find that the wound of that separation has affected your entire relationship with ambition, with collaboration, with trust in professional contexts. You hold back when you should step forward. You push away when you should lean in. You've generalized the hurt from one specific person into a posture toward an entire domain of life. And then there's the version that shows up when you're completely alone. Late at night, early in the morning, whenever the noise of the world recedes, and you're left with nothing but yourself. That's when they visit most reliably, isn't it? That's when the longing becomes undeniable. That's when you find yourself wondering, genuinely wondering, whether they might be thinking about you in that exact moment too. And the answer if you're willing to accept the psychological reality that Jung illuminated, is yes. Probably yes. Because the connection is real, the bond is unbroken, and the psyche doesn't respect the boundaries the conscious mind tries to impose. If you're recognizing yourself in this, I want you to leave one word in the comments. Connected. Not for me, for yourself. As a marker that today, you acknowledged something you've been avoiding. Today, you admitted that someone still lives inside you, and you inside them. But here's what most people never get to hear. This haunting, this being thought about and thinking about, this invisible cord that stretches across time and distance, and all the walls you've built against it, it's not a curse, it's an invitation. It's an invitation to the deepest work the psyche can undertake. It's an invitation to what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating all the scattered and split off parts of yourself into a unified, authentic self. The relationship that haunts you isn't haunting you to torment you. It's haunting you because it contains unfinished material essential to your own becoming. There's something in that connection, something you haven't yet learned, something you haven't yet felt all the way through, something you haven't yet integrated. And until you do, the haunting will continue. The midnight thoughts will keep arriving. The presence will keep making itself known in the quiet spaces of your life. Here's how you begin. Not by reaching out to the external person, at least not necessarily, and certainly not as the first step. You begin by turning inward. You begin by acknowledging the internal figure, the imago of this person that lives inside you, and you begin a conscious relationship with it. Jung developed a practice called active imagination for exactly this purpose. It's a way of engaging with unconscious contents through deliberate, waking dialogue. You find a quiet space. You close your eyes. You invite the image of this person to appear in your mind's eye. And then, without forcing or controlling, you let a conversation unfold. You speak to them. You listen to what they say back. You let the internal dynamic play out in a space where you can witness it, participate in it, and eventually transform it. This might sound strange if you've never encountered it before. It might sound like talking to yourself, which in a sense it is. But Jung understood that the self is not a single unified thing. The self is a community of voices, a congress of characters, a multiplicity contained within what we naively call I. And the person who haunts you has become one of those voices. They have a seat at the internal table whether you invited them or not. Active imagination simply gives you a way to have a direct conversation with what's already influencing you from behind the scenes. There's an ancient Greek myth about Orpheus and Eurydice that illuminates this process beautifully. Orpheus, the legendary musician, loses his beloved Eurydice to death. Consumed by grief, he descends into the underworld to retrieve her, charming Hades and Persephone with his music until they agree to let her return to the world of the living. But there's a condition. He must walk in front and she must follow behind, and he cannot turn around to look at her until they've both reached the surface. If he looks back, she will be lost forever. As you know, Orpheus fails. Just before they reach the threshold of the upper world, he cannot resist. He turns, and Eurydice fades back into the shadows, this time permanently. There are many ways to interpret this myth, but the one that resonates most with what we're exploring is this. Orpheus represents the ego attempting to retrieve something precious from the unconscious. Eurydice represents that precious thing, whether it's a lost relationship, a lost part of the self, or a lost capacity for love. The journey downward is the journey of introspection, of shadow work, of facing what has been buried. And the turning around, the fatal looking back, represents the ego's impatience, its need to control, its inability to trust the process. What Orpheus should have done what we must do is walk the entire path, complete the descent, have the encounter with what's been lost, and then ascend back to the surface without looking back in the way that holds on rather than releases. The work isn't to retrieve the actual person. The work is to retrieve what they represented, what they awakened, what they carried for you that now needs to come home to your own psyche. This is the reclaiming of projections Jung spoke about so often. Every significant relationship involves projection. We see in others what we cannot yet see in ourselves. We fall in love with our own unlived lives as reflected in another person. When the relationship ends, those projections don't automatically return to us. They can remain stuck out there, attached to the absent person, continuing to drain our psychological resources toward someone who is no longer present to receive them. The person who thinks about you every night is, in part, still holding projections of yours that you never took back. And you are holding theirs. You are each other's unfinished homework. You are each other's scattered pieces. And the nightly visitations are reminders that the reassembly isn't complete. Here's the second shift that becomes possible when you understand this. You can stop taking it personally. Not in the sense of dismissing its importance, but in the sense of recognizing that what's happening isn't really about you as an individual ego. And it isn't really about them as an individual ego. It's about the archetypal level of human connection. The way souls become entangled when they enter each other's fields. The way psychological matter gets exchanged and mixed up whenever real intimacy occurs. This isn't your fault. It isn't their fault. It's simply the nature of how the psyche works. Understanding this can release a tremendous amount of guilt and self-blame that many people carry about the relationships that continue to haunt them. You're not weak for still feeling connected. You're not pathetic for still missing them. You're human. And humans are not designed to love at surface level. When we truly open to another person, we merge in ways that don't fully unmix when the relationship ends. There's research now beyond Jung's clinical observations that supports this understanding. Neuroscience has shown that close relationships literally reshape the brain. The neural pathways that fire repeatedly when you're with someone become strengthened and specialized. You develop a kind of neurological fingerprint of the relationship, a groove in the brain that continues to influence cognition and emotion even when the person is no longer present. Your nervous system doesn't know they're gone. It still reaches for them in moments of stress or joy. It still expects their presence in the patterns it learned when they were there. This is why breakups and estrangements hurt in such a visceral, bodily way. It's not just psychological. It's physiological. Your body is mourning. Your neurons are searching for a pattern that no longer has a matching input. And the dissonance between what your nervous system expects and what reality provides creates a kind of ongoing low-level distress that can persist for years if it's never consciously addressed. If this is landing for you, share this video with someone who's going through their own version of this. Not because I need the views, but because they need the words. There's someone in your life right now who is lying awake at night, being visited by someone they thought they had left behind, and they have no framework for understanding why this keeps happening. Give them this framework. Give them the relief of knowing they're not crazy. They're not weak. They're just being human in the way humans are. The third shift involves what you actually do with the energy of this connection. Because right now, for many of you, that energy is going nowhere productive. It's cycling through the same loops of memory and longing and unresolved feeling. It's trapped in the space between you and this person, generating heat but no light, creating suffering but no growth. This energy needs to be redirected. In many spiritual traditions, there's an understanding that the same energy that creates suffering can be transmuted into the energy of awakening. The longing you feel for this person, if properly understood and properly channeled, can become the fuel for your own transformation. The love that has nowhere to go can become the love that opens your heart more generally. The grief that seems endless can become the grief that finally teaches you how to feel fully. This is what the alchemists meant when they spoke of turning lead into gold. Not literal metal transmutation, but psychological transformation. The heavy, burdensome, seemingly useless material of your suffering can be worked with, refined, cooked in the fires of consciousness until it becomes something precious. And the suffering you carry around this person, this connection that won't let you go, this is some of the richest raw material you have for the alchemical work. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." What he's really saying is that the places where you hurt the most are the places where the most growth is possible. The relationship that haunts you is haunting you precisely because it contains unintegrated material of immense value. The pain isn't punishment, it's invitation. But making the darkness conscious requires something from you. It requires that you stop running. It requires that you turn and face what you've been avoiding. It requires that you feel what you've been refusing to feel. Not once, not as a grand dramatic gesture, but repeatedly, as an ongoing practice of presence and self-confrontation. This might mean sitting with the memory of this person and actually letting the feelings come without trying to explain them away or fix them. It might mean writing letters you never send, pouring out everything you never said, getting the words out of your body where they've been festering. It might mean speaking to a therapist who can help you navigate the territory without getting lost in it. It might mean ritual or art or movement, or whatever form of expression allows the stuck energy to finally move. The goal isn't to stop thinking about them. The goal is to change your relationship to the thinking, to move from being haunted to being in dialogue, to move from avoidance to engagement, to move from suffering to integration. I worked with a concept years ago that I've returned to many times since. Jung called it the transcendent function. It describes the psyche's natural capacity to reconcile opposites, to find a third way between positions that seem irreconcilable. Right now, you might feel stuck between two impossible options: reaching out to this person and possibly reopening old wounds, or continuing to repress and avoid and suffer the nightly visitations. Neither option feels right. Both options feel costly. The transcendent function suggests there's a third path that you can't see from within the opposition. A path that emerges not from choosing one side or the other, but from holding the tension of both until something new arises. This new thing might look like completing the relationship internally without needing external contact. It might look like reaching out in a completely different way than you've imagined, with different intentions, different expectations. It might look like releasing the relationship altogether, but a genuine release that comes from fullness rather than denial. You can't know what the third path looks like until you've done the work of holding the tension consciously. And that work requires presence and patience, and a willingness to not know. Something begins to shift when you engage with this material consciously. The quality of the nighttime thinking changes. Instead of being invaded by unwanted memories, you begin to have genuine conversations with the internalized figure. Instead of feeling drained by the connection, you begin to recover the energy that was bound up in it. Instead of being defined by the relationship, you begin to integrate what it taught you and move beyond it. I want to tell you about a woman I encountered through Jung's case studies, a woman who spent years tormented by the ending of a love affair. The relationship had been passionate but destructive, intoxicating but impossible. When it ended, she fell into a depression that no amount of distraction or positive thinking could touch. She couldn't stop thinking about him. He appeared in her dreams almost every night. She felt his presence constantly, like a phantom limb that kept reaching for something no longer there. What changed for her was exactly what I've been describing. She stopped trying to not think about him. She stopped treating the thoughts as symptoms to be eliminated. Instead, she turned toward them. She engaged with the internal figure through active imagination. She wrote dialogues with him. She asked him questions and listened for answers. She stopped treating the connection as a pathology and started treating it as a path. What she discovered over time was that he represented something in her own psyche that she had never developed. He carried her own capacity for passion, for abandon, for living fully without calculation or fear. She had projected this onto him because she couldn't yet access it directly in herself, and as long as he carried it, she remained dependent on him, or at least on her memory of him, for access to that essential part of her own being. The work became retrieving the projection, recognizing that the passion she loved in him was actually her own passion, waiting to be claimed. The abandonment she experienced with him was her own abandonment, trying to teach her how to let go of control. The aliveness she felt in his presence was her own aliveness, temporarily externalized onto another human being who couldn't carry it forever. When she finally understood this, something remarkable happened. The nightly visitations didn't stop exactly, but they changed. He stopped appearing as a lost lover and started appearing as a guide, a figure who had served his purpose and was ready to release her into her own power. The grief transformed into gratitude. The longing transformed into a summons toward her own unlived life. This is what awaits you on the other side of the work, not the erasing of this person from your psyche. They will always be part of your story, but a fundamental transformation in what their presence means and how it affects you. The weight you've been carrying can be put down, not by forgetting, but by completing. Jung once wrote something that I return to whenever I encounter someone struggling with this kind of unfinished relationship. He said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Notice he didn't say the privilege is to be happy or to be successful or even to be loved. The privilege is to become who you truly are. And the people who haunt us, the connections that won't let us go, they are essential to that becoming. They carry pieces of our puzzle. They hold mirrors up to aspects of ourselves we couldn't see any other way. They force us into the depths, where the real treasure is hidden. What he's really saying is that the person you stopped talking to, the one who still thinks about you every night, is not just a figure from your past. They are an agent of your individuation, a character in the story of your becoming, a catalyst for the transformation you are still in the process of undergoing. Honoring this doesn't mean going back to them. It means going deeper into yourself and finding what they were pointing toward all along. I want you to imagine something now. Imagine a future version of yourself who has done this work, who has engaged with the internal figure, retrieved the projections, felt the feelings, completed the grieving, and emerged on the other side. This future version of you is sitting somewhere quiet, maybe in a room you don't yet know, in a city you haven't yet lived in. They're thinking about the person who used to haunt them, but the quality of the thinking is completely different. There's no desperation in it, no longing, no pain. There's something like gratitude, actually. A recognition that this person, this relationship, was Hano as one of the most important teachers of their life. Not in spite of the pain, but because of it. The suffering carved out spaces in them that could then be filled with wisdom. The loss taught them how to hold what remains without grasping. The separation revealed their own depths to them in a way that no easy, comfortable relationship ever could. This future version of you still thinks about this person sometimes, but the thoughts are tender, not tormented. They can hold the memory without being held captive by it. They can acknowledge the love without needing it returned. They can honor the connection without needing to maintain it. And here's what might surprise you. This future version of you is closer than you think. The work I've been describing isn't the work of years necessarily. It's the work of willingness, of deciding today that you will stop running and start facing, of allowing yourself to feel what you've been protecting yourself from feeling, of trusting that on the other side of that feeling is not destruction but liberation. You'll be sitting somewhere ordinary one day, a park bench, a kitchen table, a quiet corner of a cafe, and you'll feel something you haven't felt in years. Not happiness exactly. Something quieter. Something more real. A sense that you are finally in the right place inside yourself. That the scattered pieces have found their way home. That the person who used to haunt you has been honored, released, and integrated into the wholeness of who you are now. This doesn't mean you'll never miss them. You might. But the missing will be clean, not complicated. Simple, not self-destructive. A recognition of what was beautiful rather than a clinging to what is gone. It won't be perfect. You'll still have hard days, moments where the old patterns resurface, where the longing catches you off guard, where you wonder if you've made any progress at all. But the quality of those hard days will be different, because you will be different. You'll have the tools to meet them, the awareness to recognize what's happening, the capacity to feel without being overwhelmed. You will have become someone who can hold the full weight of their own heart without breaking. There's one more thing I want to leave you with before we close, something that might change everything